We are always looking for ways to have our homestead work more efficiently. And with our shorter growing season and really cold winters, we need to be efficient with most often our food preservation. So, about 4 years ago, we took the leap and invested in a freeze dryer. And it has been a huge game changer for our family and our homestead. We've learned so much over the years, from how to freeze dry fruits and vegetables to full meals and meats. Freeze drying has really allowed us to preserve foods in a way that helps save us time, money, and storage space. Many people aren't convinced when it comes to owning a freeze dryer. We totally get that. They are expensive. So let me share today how freeze drying has really helped us save time, money, and space in a way that fits into our busy lifestyle. From preserving seasonal harvests to making ready-to-eat meals that come to the rescue during hectic times, we've got a lot of great things to share with you today. Freeze drying has completely transformed our family's food preservation. Before we had our freeze dryer, we were constantly juggling time canning, trying to put food in the freeze dryer or in the dehydrator, and really trying to keep up with the harvest that comes in the fall. And it gets exhausting, especially when you have a young family. And a lot of the times you're doing it on your own if your spouse is out harvesting or they're off at work. So it can be super stressful. But when we got our freeze dryer, it really changed things for us. We were able to preserve things in bulk without taking up a bunch of our freezer space, which we do have our refrigerator freezer combo in the house. We have a big freezer for our meats out in the garage, as well as another refrigerator freezer in the garage. So we do have freezer space, but when we end up filling it with meat or we've butchered our chickens, the space just isn't there for, frozen vegetables or frozen fruits. And so it just became this shuffle. I was constantly shuffling food, trying to use food that maybe we didn't necessarily need to use up so that we could put a chicken in there. And it was getting really frustrating as a homesteader. Like, how do I do all these things? So bringing in that freeze dryer really made a big difference for us. We've been able to preserve things in bulk that we maybe wouldn't have been able to preserve before, and not have such a mess in the scheduling and the when to eat this and when to eat that. It's kind of opened up our ability to preserve things and keep them on the shelf for longer and long-term storage. One really good example of this is we came into 40 giant bunches of green onions one season, and they were nice and fresh, but I just knew that they weren't going to last us. And we don't go through green onions that fast. You might need one bunch or just one little stalk for a recipe, and then you have all of these green onions left. So we chopped them up and put them into the freeze dryer. We filled up all 5 trays, and I think we ran it 2 or 3 different times to get through all of these green onions. And then we put them into Mylar bags and sealed them up and put them on our shelf. I have not purchased green onions in 3 years, and I don't need to purchase them for probably several years to come. I open a bag of green onions, pull out a handful, either toss them in a casserole, put them in a bowl to reconstitute and rehydrate them, and then add them to a recipe. I put them on tops of salads just the way they are. It adds a little crunch, but also that oniony flavor. That has saved us so much time and money on buying green onions. And we eat a lot of onions. We have onions multiple times a week, whether it's yellow onions, red onions, green onions, but I have not had to purchase green onions. And so that has been really exciting for us to be able to say, hey, we preserved all these and we don't have to spend money on them. It's also a big time saver. During the harvest season, when the produce is ready to go, it's ready to go. I don't have time to say, okay, next week I'll can these peaches. When they're ripe and ready to go, you want to get them in the cans. You want to get them in the freezer, in the freeze dryer, because they are at their highest peak. their flavor's the best, their nutrients are the best, and you want them to go. And when you have your own homestead, you want things to be fresh and yummy when you eat them. You don't want to pick them 3 weeks in advance and hope they ripen. And in the past, it was like, okay, now I have to take 3 days to can peaches because they're all ready to go. Or now I can chop up the peaches, fill 5 trays in my freeze dryer of peaches, and then take the rest of the day to can them, or tomorrow to can them. And it really saves me a lot of time, because when the peach is ready, maybe the green beans are ready. And when the green beans are ready, maybe then the tomatoes are ready. And it's just constant. So it's one less stressor that I have, because I can always say, I don't have time to preserve these green beans because I'm working on peaches. Throw them in the freeze dryer. So it's just a really nice way to preserve time and energy. Of course, as with everything in life, freeze drying isn't perfect. We've had our share of freeze drying fails. One of our biggest freeze drying fails was the first time we tried grapes and cherries. We didn't know that high sugar foods take forever to freeze dry. We loaded up trays with fresh grapes, excited to see how they'd turn out. After hours in the freeze dryer, we checked on them, and it was a sticky disaster. They were still wet inside, and the sugar made them so messy that we didn't even try to save them. It was not worth the cleanup for us. Others have been successful with grapes, but we're not one of them. Then it came time to do the cherries. They did freeze dry eventually, but it took over 50 hours for them to finish. At that point, we realized we could have just canned or frozen them and saved ourselves a lot of time and energy. Now, if we want freeze-dried cherries or grapes, we just puree them into a juice first, and it works so much better. So it's important to know that as you go through your freeze-drying journey, you'll learn a lot of things that you didn't know. Over the years, we've tried a lot of different foods in the freeze dryer. We've also researched, shared, and asked questions of fellow freeze dryers. It's important to know that just because you want to freeze dry something doesn't mean that you should, and that maybe it might not work out for you. But there are a lot of great foods that you can successfully freeze dry. Foods like fruits and veggies. We like to freeze dry strawberries, bananas, apples, pineapple. They all turn out really amazing. They rehydrate well, and they really taste great just as a crunchy snack if you don't want to rehydrate them. Some of our vegetables that we like to freeze dry are peas, corn, bell peppers, and green beans. They hold up, and their texture and flavor are really good. And as I said earlier, onions is a big one at our house as well. This year we started doing more meats. So we've done cooked chicken, beef, and turkey. They all store really beautifully. After like Thanksgiving and Christmas, we'll often put the leftover turkey or ham into our freeze dryer to save us a little bit of money, so we can use those things in the future. For other meats, we do eggs all the time. We will put them into a bowl and scramble them, and then pour them into the freeze dryer and freeze dry them that way. We have freeze dried eggs multiple times a year because we have a big flock of chickens. And as you know, in the winter months, if you have chickens, they don't lay as often, and we try not to force them into laying. We want the natural progression of their cycles. So we'll freeze dry eggs. And then I know in the winter months when I'm doing my baking and cooking that I can just pull out my freeze dried eggs and reconstitute them. Dairy is also something that can be freeze dried. You can do shredded cheeses, you can do yogurt drops, you can do milk. You need the right prep when it comes to dairy, because some dairies are higher in fat content and they don't freeze dry quite as well, or it takes longer to freeze dry. So you'll want to make sure and research before you try certain types of dairy. And then lastly, one of my favorites is freeze drying meals. And I often will freeze dry meals as leftovers from our refrigerator. So perhaps I made a lasagna and we only ate half of it. I can freeze dry the rest of that lasagna. Same things with soups and stews or different kinds of casseroles. You can also do things like scrambled eggs, maybe a potato hash or something like that. So full meals are actually a really great addition to using your freeze dryer. There are some foods that take a lot of effort or aren't even worth trying in the freeze dryer. High fat foods like butter, certain cheeses, or really fatty meats do not freeze dry well unless they're cut into teeny tiny pieces, and even then it's hit or miss. If something comes out really greasy in the freeze dryer, it's not going to preserve very well. So that's just something important to note. Sugary foods like syrups and honeys, anything that has a really high sugar content is not going to freeze dry well. So because you can't fully freeze them. So if you put honey in the freezer, it doesn't freeze. And so if it doesn't freeze, it doesn't freeze dry. So that's important to know. Things that do freeze dry, but they maybe don't look great. Raw potatoes. They have so much starch in them, and they, just like when you leave potatoes cut on the countertop, they'll start to turn brown. They'll do that in the freeze dryer. So cooked potatoes are a little bit better, at least aesthetically, although I have freeze dried raw potatoes and, they still taste fine. Avocados are similar. So if you're going to do like an avocado, maybe put it in a lemon juice before you put it in the freeze dryer if you care about the color of your avocados when they come out. They'll kind of turn a purpley brown color as well. So those are just some things that maybe take more effort or are maybe not even worth trying. One thing that we really underestimated when it came to freeze drying is how much time we'd save if we really prepped smarter in using our freeze dryer. So for instance, pre-freezing some of our foods actually cuts back a lot of time in the freeze dryer and helps us be able to run the freeze dryer more often. So for instance, let's say we had a big batch of apples come in. We could slice all those apples, put them on our trays, pop them in the freezer while maybe the green beans are already in the freeze dryer. And then when the green beans are done, we pull them out and we can pop those apples in. And since they're already frozen, it will cut down several hours in the freeze drying process. Next, try and group similar foods. So if I'm running apples, I wouldn't put like chicken with the apples because they're going to have different dry times. Chickens have a lot of moisture. They have more fat. Apples have sugar with their moisture. And so they're just not going to take the same amount of time to dry. Or for instance, another one might be like spinach with tomatoes. The tomatoes have a ton of moisture. The spinach is just a little leaf. The spinach will be done, in like 11 hours or something. And those tomatoes are going to take a lot longer. And so if I already know my tomatoes are going to take longer, I'm going to put something with them that would take the same amount of time or something similar. Another tip is try to slice everything fairly evenly. You don't have to be perfect, but if you're going to do apples, try and slice them all about the same size. And that will, again, cut some of that time so that you're able to, everything will kind of freeze evenly. Moisture will be removed evenly. Everything will dry evenly. And you don't have to keep loading your machine. Then we come to storage. Storing your freeze-dried food correctly is really critical. Storing foods right helps keep them fresh for years and years to come. It prevents tears later when you open something and you realize it wasn't completely dry and all of your hard work, all of that harvesting and that loving on that plant was for nothing because they didn't store well. So it's important to really know how to check your foods in the freeze dryer. We had a lot of early mistakes when we put some things into mason jars and didn't seal them properly, and that was really heartbreaking. So storing your freeze-dried food is important. Now, for short-term storage, mason jars work great. So I've got a few mason jars here. They work awesome. You can put a oxygen absorber in them. You can vacuum seal them, whether with a little machine or you can use your freeze dryer to vacuum seal them. So for short-term storage, mason jars, I think, are great if they're available to you. They need to be stored in a cool, dry, dark place if possible, so you don't have any damage from the sun or from light. Or if you're just going to use them really quick, sometimes I'll freeze dry some fruit and just pop it in a mason jar. And I know in like 24 hours it will be gone because my kids will eat it all. So it kind of depends on that. Short-term mason jars are great. Long-term storage, I personally don't do mason jars. Mason jars are kind of coveted at my house. I don't want to waste my mason jars on my freeze-dried food. I need them for when I can my peaches or my tomato sauce or whatever. So instead, I like Mylar bags for long-term storage. There are lots of Mylar bags out there. Harvest Right and other freeze-dried companies typically have their own Mylar bags. They're usually really thick, and that's great. I personally don't like them because they don't stand. They just are flat. And I guess if everything freeze-dried flat, it wouldn't matter, but things do not. So I prefer Mylar bags that will actually stand on their own. You can get all different sizes. You want to try and get a heavy weight so it's thicker because some of your freeze-dried food is kind of pokey. You can see with these green beans. They kind of poke out of the bag here. And if they're sharp enough, they could poke through or put small puncture holes, and then moisture and light and can get in there and ruin it. So it's important, maybe test a few different brands of Mylar bags and see what works for you. And then make sure that everything that you freeze dry, you label. So my labels are really simple. I just put what it is and the dates. And this one I actually put like the actual day of the month. So this was November 19th of 2022. This one just says January of 2024. Sometimes I get really descriptive. Sometimes these are, I think, like this one, shredded zucchini. This isn't just zucchini, it's shredded. That way when I open it and I'm like, oh, it's zucchini, and I open it, I was like, oh, I don't want shredded zucchini. So some things you really do want to describe. One of the best things that we have actually done for our family with regards to our freeze dryer is freeze-dried meals. We've freeze-dried pasta dishes, cooked meats, soups, and stews. And these meals have really been a lifesaver during our busiest seasons. So during the fall harvest, when my days are packed with picking and preserving, I don't always have the energy to cook from scratch. So instead, I might pull out a freeze-dried meal and reconstitute it with hot water, and we have a healthy dinner on the table that we didn't have to go out and purchase. And that is a game changer. It's also great during cold and flu season. Our youngest got the flu this year, and I did not feel like cooking. I was spending a lot of time with him because he had a high fever. It was not fun, but I could make some nourishing meals to warm everybody up, to help everybody else stay healthy, and to help him feel better. And all I had to do was open my Mylar bag and add hot water to the pan. And it was just really wonderful as a mom to be able to do and provide a healthy meal without the stress. By now you've seen how freeze drying has transformed our homestead, what we've learned over the years, and some of the mistakes that we've made. But is a freeze dryer the right investment for you? Let's break it down. Freeze drying can be a game changer, but it's not for everyone. Here's who's going to get the most out of it. First, homesteaders and gardeners, because you can preserve your harvest without taking up freezer space or needing to can for hours and days on end. A freeze dryer makes total sense for those who have big gardens. The next group might be those who are preppers and emergency planners. You'll have a long-term food supply without relying on store-bought options. You can decide what foods your family will eat and freeze dry them regularly. It makes organizing and planning very fast and efficient. If you travel or camp or hunt often, a freeze dryer may be exactly what you need. You can take homemade meals on the go. We've had family ask us to freeze dry meals for their hunting trips so they can eat what they know they like instead of whatever the store might provide. Plus, All they have to do is add hot water, and they have a meal in minutes. Lastly, if you're a busy family like us, a freeze dryer might be your solution to healthy meal planning. With a packed work, school, or sports schedule, freeze-dried meals make dinner so much easier. You can plan extra for meals and put those leftovers in the freeze dryer. Later in the year, you have a quick and easy meal you can reconstitute with hot water without thinking or planning at all. And after 4 years, I can say without a doubt that yes, it's one of the best homestead investments that we personally have made. The ability for us to preserve our food quickly, save money, and have a long-term emergency storage for our food has been really huge. From saving time during the harvest season to having meals ready in minutes for our family, it really has transformed the way that we preserve and prepare our food. Whether you're looking to save money, time, or just make your life a little easier, a freeze dryer might be just what you're looking for and the tool that will make that better for you. If you're considering a freeze dryer, think about how much food you could preserve, how often you'd use it, and whether it fits your lifestyle. For us, it's been an absolute game changer. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Do you have a freeze dryer? Are you thinking about getting one? What questions do you have about the process? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more homesteading tips. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.